for any of your testimony or anything on these lines?
Yeah, I have to be careful what I say in detail because there is an open whistleblower reprisal investigation on my behalf, and I don't want to compromise that investigation by providing anything that may help provide somebody information. But it was very brutal and very unfortunate, some of the tactics they used to hurt me both professionally and personally, to be quite frank. Yeah.
It's very unfortunate. As they say, when you're over the target, that's when they do the most firing at you. Do you have any personal knowledge of people who have been harmed or injured in efforts to cover up or conceal these extraterrestrial technology?
Yes. Personally.
Have anyone been murdered that you would that you know of or have heard of, I guess?
I have to be careful asking that question. I directed people with that knowledge to the appropriate authorities.
Maybe in a, if we could get in a confidential area, SCIF, we could talk about that. But unfortunately, we were denied access to the SCIF, and that's very unfortunate in this scenario.
Mr. Grush, finally, do you believe that our government is in possession of UAPs?
Absolutely, based on interviewing over 40 witnesses over 4 years.
And where?
I know the exact locations, and those locations were provided to the Inspector General, and some of which to the intelligence committees. I actually had the people with the firsthand knowledge provide a protected disclosure to the Inspector General.
Intelligent extraterrestrials.
Something I can't discuss in public setting.
Okay, I can't ask when you think this occurred. If you believe we have crashed craft, stated earlier, do we have the bodies of the pilots who piloted this craft?
As I've stated publicly already in my News Nation interview, biologics came with some of these recoveries, yeah.
Were they, I guess, human or non-human biologics?
Non-human, and that was the assessment of people with direct knowledge on the program I talked to that are currently still on the program.
And was this documentary evidence, this video, photos, eyewitness? Like, how would that be determined?
The specific documentation I would have to talk to you in a SCIF about.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay, so, and you may or may not be able to answer my last question, and maybe we get into a SCIF at the next hearing that we have, but who in the government, either what agency, sub-agency, what contractors, who should be called into the next hearing about UAPs, either in a public setting or even in a private setting? And you probably can't name names, but what agencies or organizations, contractors, et cetera, do we need to call in to get these questions answered, whether it's about funding, what programs are happening, and what's out there?
I can give you a specific cooperative and hostile witness list of specific individuals that were in those.
And how soon can we get that list?
I'm happy to provide that to you after the hearing.
Super, thank you, and I yield back.
Or could it be manipulated purposely by people who have the technology to simulate UFO sightings? And people say, well, of course not. Who would do a thing like that? Well, I would remind you that during the Watergate investigation, it was discovered that there was a plan originated in the White House to surface a submarine off the coast of Cuba and paint the second coming of Christ over the island of Cuba using holograms. Which is well within our technology today. The idea was that since there is a large Catholic population in Cuba, they would be so upset by this vision that this would saturate the communication channels, you know, the telephone system in Cuba, long enough for an invasion to take place.
How interesting. I never heard of that.
Well, I think that's you know, a classic in psychological warfare, but that kind of manipulation is well understood, and I have personally investigated several apparently genuine UFO cases where there was, in fact, a manipulation. My conclusion, the conclusion of scientists working with me, was that there was, in fact, a manipulation taking place, and that it was not a hoax on the part of the witnesses, but a hoax on the part of somebody much better organized than...
So there are possibly all of these levels going on simultaneously.
Today, with the current technology, that would be possible.
The two scientists became close colleagues. with Hynek entrusting Valet to index the reams of Blue Book files scattered throughout Hynek's home. It was there that Valet made a chance discovery of a letter so secret he had to appeal to the chief counsel of the Senate Defense Appropriations Committee to get it declassified.
That document changed my life. It taught me that the subject had been taken much more seriously than anybody thought.
The document revealed an ultra-secret, highly funded scientific investigation, working parallel to Blue Book, unknown to all but a select few. The letter was signed by H.C. Cross, Director of Exotic Metallurgy at Battelle National Laboratories.
These were the people who had analyzed the files with a large budget, with highly competent physicists and computer scientists. Who are these people? What information did they have?
Good evening. Tonight we go after a fantastic story. The story that flying saucers from other worlds are visiting our planet, just as we are exploring outer space with our own rocket satellites. Our guest is former Marine Air Corps Major Donald Kehoe in his campaign to prove that flying saucers exist. My name is Mike Wallace. The cigarette is Parliament. Why will the United States government withhold information from United States citizens? For what reason?
The Air Force is simply treating the American people like children. They don't trust them with the facts.
We've got a quote-unquote genuine phenomenon. We've got a series of advanced technology projects, special access program going on using the UFO as a cover. And then you've got this sort of reverse engineering setup that's going on that are creating these, special access programs that are happening. And then you've got the phenomenon that is mimicking these special access programs. You've got helicopters with impossible levels of acceleration. You've got, craft flying around the place that look like triangular craft that should be part of the Air Force arsenal, but they're probably the phenomenon. So you've got this two layers of deception with the UFO phenomenon. So the question is, which we've been asking for decades, are they ours or theirs at all?
I just want to, again, I keep feeling like I have to back up. So you have direct knowledge that our government was using the UFO phenomenon as cover in a way, like what like faking UFO encounters?
Yeah, I mean, Colonel Barry Hennessy was legendary in the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. He ran a subset of that called an organization called PJ. This was the really heavy-duty counterintelligence organization. And so we interviewed him in 2009.
Like counterintelligence about the UFO topic, or a lot of things?
Of the Air Force, all of the Air Force ops.
Okay.
Yeah. So a subset of that came up during our interview. The only reason we interviewed Colonel Hennessy was because he was a legend in this field. And we had heard rumors that the Air Force had utilized the UFO phenomenon to cover various special access programs. A good example was an early version of the F-117 had crashed near Dulce, New Mexico in the 80s. And so there was a UFO lore grew up around that part of New Mexico. And it was perpetrated by agents of AFOSI. So it was very convenient for the Air Force to have a lot of people talk about, alien UFOs crashing in northern New Mexico, when actually an early prototype of the F-117 had crashed in northern New Mexico. So that was an example of a sort of a marriage of convenience. And other examples that Colonel Hennessy gave us was there was a very famous set of sightings in what was called the Northern Tier missile bases that spanned between Canada and the United States. It was Loring Air Force Base in Maine and Wurtsmith Air Force Base Malmstrom Air Force Base, Minot Air Force Base, right across the northern tier. A lot of those bases during the 1970s had incursions from very weird sort of UFO type activity, but Colonel Hennessy told us some of those were ours. You know, some of those were direct penetration attempts to assess and evaluate the security level of these Air Force bases. But he flat out said some of them were not ours, some of them were theirs. So it was this discrepancy between some are ours and some are theirs. But the northern tier sightings are usually associated with only UFO activity. But we know from what Colonel Hennessy told us that it was both.
You know, I think we're finding that perhaps if what Grush and his iron posts are asserting is true, then, you know, what we're going to find out is that probably what's been going on rather than straight disinformation over the years is something that I call intel laundering, where you take a really sensitive piece of information and you know that it's probably going to be really difficult to keep it secret forever. So instead, what you do is you give it to groups who will discredit it for you merely because of their association with like the UFO community, right? If you have, let's say, a government agent or someone from the Advanced Theoretical Physics Working Group who's trying to find information their way into these groups, right? And they have this piece of intel and they ask you, well, where did you hear about that? Did you hear it from like a confidential source? They say, well, no, I heard it at a UFO conference, right? Then immediately you basically render that piece of intel. That's not a serious piece of intel anymore. Now it's just part of the poisoned tree or the poisoned well, right? And I see, honestly, and I know a lot of people will disagree with this, I see that as MJ-12, right? I think there are aspects of MJ-12 that were absolutely intel laundering, where it's like, if we could just give this directly to the UFO community, give them what they want, they will on their own discredit this for us just because the stigma is so strong. The stigma that we worked to sow back in the 40s and 50s, right? All of that stuff, they basically set themselves up where they don't have to keep the secret anymore. You know, there aren't people at the Washington Post or the New York Times on staff that are digging for these secrets. And I think that's part of the problem. And so what I think we're going to find, again, is that this core story, this UFO lore, is going to be vindicated point by point. There will be aspects and details, names and things like that that are going to be slightly different. Contractors that we expected, there might be a few unexpected contractors there, you know, and different aspects. But ultimately, I think that the UFO lore that we've heard is correct. And maybe that's just because I'm especially credulous and I want to believe that. But I think that, you know, this disinformation, you know, Grush talks about that there's been a disinformation campaign that was waged for decades on the, you know, on the American people and I guess on the greater public as well. But I think this is how it's done, right? By taking legitimate information and poisoning it, right? By associating it with something that's actually true, but it's been so stigmatized that you don't even have to keep it really super secret anymore, right? It can be out as long as it's not out in a legitimate fashion. And I think that this is where Grush is taking us. He's going to get this information out, or his iron posts are going to help get this information out in a legitimate fashion.
UFOs, unidentified scientific objects, have been one of the great scientific bugaboos of the last decade. Say you've seen one and you're ridiculed, or at least that's the way it used to be. Nowadays, while there are still plenty of scoffers and jeerers, you're more likely to be listened to, and an increasing amount of scientific investigation is being conducted. In Australia at the moment is Professor James McDonald, Professor of Meteorology at the University of Arizona. Officially, he was working for the US Navy, but in his spare time he's checking many Australian reports of UFOs and comparing them with American reports. His aim is to see if the reports tally, in short, whether UFOs constitute a global phenomenon. In Melbourne, he's talking with Brian King.
Professor McDonald, what have you found here that's been of use to you?
I've investigated about 50 or 60 cases since I came down to New Zealand and Australia. Extremely interesting UFO sightings. A lot of help from local investigatory groups in Sydney and Melbourne. And have found as I go through these that the type of sightings are essentially similar to those in the United States.
What are the main similarities?
persons of really quite high credibility reporting unconventional objects, discs, cigar-shaped objects, frequently at very low elevation, hovering over sometimes urban areas, sometimes over cars, following cars. Same kind of public reaction, quite a strong similarity to the American reluctance to report them to official channels because of fear of ridicule. But behind it all, a very large number, a very surprisingly large number of these sightings of quite unconventional objects maneuvering in our airspace.
You have been highly critical of your own government's attitude towards UFOs.
Indeed I have, yes. I've taken a very good look at the American official investigation program, Project Blue Book, run by the Air Force, and I have quite unequivocally described it to scientific colleagues back in the States as superficial and incompetent.
Why has the government taken this attitude, in your opinion?
It's not a brief story, but it goes back to 1953 when a CIA-involved investigation was held. As a result of the extremely heavy wave of sightings in 1952, the CIA and Air Force became so concerned over the sheer number of reports that were tying up American intelligence channels that they wanted to get this signal out of the system, asked the Air Force, the CIA asked the Air Force for a debunking policy. The literal wording was to debunk the flying saucers, to decrease public interest in the UFOs. Regulations were promulgated very shortly that made it a crime punishable with, I think it's $10,000 fine and or 10 years in prison to release any information at airbase level on UFOs. And as a result of that, in a sequence of steady downgrading, the whole problem has been essentially lost from scientific sight in the U.S., and nothing resembling any scientific investigation has been going on in the past 15 years.
Has this been typical of the attitude of most world governments?
As nearly as I can tell, yes. There seems to be quite surprising similarity between the official Russian, British, Australian, Canadian, American, French, Italian pronouncements. They all seem to take the view that there's nothing to it, that it's a lot of nonsense, that people see things, and that it is not a real scientific problem at all, and I most heartily disagree with that.
You have been as far as the United Nations with this problem.
Yes, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, on the 7th of this month, of June, nearly a month ago now, I spoke to the Outer Space Affairs Group in the United Nations, urging immediate UN action on this problem. It seems to me that the UN is one of the best places to tackle the international, the global aspects of the UFO problem, and all evidence now points to its being a truly global phenomenon.
U Thant made a statement at the time.
I didn't get to see U Thant. That was a busy day, June 7th. In fact, I had a date to see him at 4 o'clock, and if there was any 1 hour that was the peak of the Mideast crisis, 4 o'clock was it. So I unfortunately didn't get to see U Thant. But quite recently, a few days ago, I got a phone call from San Francisco pointing out that he had made a statement to Drew Pearson, an American columnist, that aside from the Vietnamese War, the UFO problem is the greatest international problem. And I sent him a wire strongly endorsing his position, but disagreeing with him to the extent of saying that I believe it's the most important international problem.
Why?
We have in the UFO problem a very strange situation. Here for 20 years plus, essentially similar phenomena have been reported all over the world, large numbers in the U.S., officialdom ignoring them, Air Forces ignoring them, and yet apparently a steady increase in the numbers of reliable reports from people in all walks of life seeing these objects that are not products of our technology, that are not meteorological astronomical phenomena, hovering at low altitude, increasing numbers in urban areas, and collectively we don't know what's going on. That's an extremely unwise situation, no matter how you view it. We do not know what is involved in this problem. There are no strong indications of anything resembling hostility. I see some faint indications of hazard and danger, but in general, to have this possibility that the world is under something resembling reconnaissance, possibly from some extraterrestrial source, and to go on about our petty ways collectively doesn't seem to me to be a wise situation. So I'm trying to get scientists and governmental agencies to take a look at this at a highly accelerated pace.
It is. You know, one of the things, if I had to look back and go point my finger in the face of somebody within the secret parts of the government, if I was really angry, I would say, you devising this plan to release stuff and ridicule it at the same way was genius and the bane of my existence. Because what it did was, hey, we can leak stuff, you're going to hear it, but you're probably going to think it's weird or dumb or not true, so at least you absorb the info, but you're not scared of it. Over time, that operation of ridiculing what they leak out has created this tinfoil hat crowd, or what one of my advisors, my lead advisor, he calls it the giggle factor. You know, he said, you know, one of my advisors is the top of the food chain. I mean, when you look at the parts of the national security establishment that manage the biggest secret on earth, I mean, the level of where this person is just extraordinary. He was just telling me that he went to an aerospace event, an industry defense kind of event, a big deal where all the national security companies go and showcase their stuff and have talks and whatever. He says even there, people giggle at it. You know, they just think it's funny. And these are guys that should know about this stuff and are dealing with it, because the way it was explained to me is you will find a bunch of men in suits standing around an elephant, which means all these people that should know what the elephant is just reaching up and feeling part of the elephant. Oh, I feel something long, it's just a hose. Or I feel something big and strong and go, oh, it's just a wall, you know. But none of them know it's an elephant. And it's just an analogy for, you know, all these people in these places should know what the UFO phenomenon is. And they're working on it, but they have no clue what it is, but they are working on pieces of it.
The idea, I mean, it's hard to tell somebody who doesn't want to take the topic seriously that there really are people in government and around government and within the military-industrial complex that know it's real, maybe a small number, but that's true, right? I mean, there's a level of people who know that this is true and real and important.
Absolutely. Not only is there a level of people that know that this is true, it is the grand chess game. One of the things I found out that we will be communicating on the docuseries about this is why it's been kept secret. And when we talk about that, which unfortunately I can't do here, but when we bring that out, people are going to step back and go, whoa, holy cow, now we understand, you know, the enormity of this and the seriousness of this and why we've done everything that we have done. And I think people are actually going to applaud what they've done. And so when you look at this, it's not so much there's just a group that are involved in it. It's like, it's a major task that is at hand that they're dealing with. It's an ongoing situation. It's not just some people waiting for a weird report to fall on their desk about some sighting. It's like, this is a major, major initiative to accomplish something.
After 51 years of study and investigation, I've reached 4 major conclusions about flying saucers. And I prefer the term flying saucers. Oh, why don't you say UFO? Because all flying saucers are UFOs. Very few UFOs are flying saucers. I'm interested in the flying saucers, not in the UFOs. Just like the basketball coach knows he wants a 7-footer. Don't tell him about all the midgets. Who cares? Give me the 7-footer. I want the flying saucer stories. Okay, 4 major conclusions. First, the evidence is overwhelming that planet Earth is being visited by intelligently controlled extraterrestrial spacecraft. In other words, some, underline 28 times, some UFOs are alien spacecraft. Most are not, forget about it. Most isotopes aren't fissionable either, but you can build a nuclear reactor with the ones that are. Secondly, the subject of flying saucers represents a kind of cosmic Watergate, meaning some few people within major governments have known since at least 1947 that indeed some UFOs are alien spacecraft. I'm not saying everybody in the government knows. I worked under security. You don't keep secrets by telling everybody. You restrict the access as much as you possibly can. Need to know, compartmentalization, all this sort of thing. Third conclusion is that none of the arguments made against the first two by a small group of very noisy negativists, including my University of Chicago classmate, Carl Sagan, stand up under careful scrutiny. Oh, they sound splendid. But when you look at the data, Carl, for example, just to give an example of that, said there are interesting sightings that aren't reliable. There are reliable sightings that aren't interesting. Those are true statements. But there are no interesting and reliable sightings. That's totally false. Biggest study done for the United States Air Force. The better the quality of the sighting, the higher the reliability. The more likely to be unexplainable. That's a fact. So none of those arguments stand up. And finally, the fourth conclusion. We're dealing with the biggest story of the millennium. Visits to planet Earth by alien spacecraft, successful cover-up of the best data, bodies and wreckage, obviously, for 62 years.
Joining our panel is Bill Nye, the science guy. He's a scientist, engineer, best-selling author, and Emmy-winning television personality. He's, by the way, a member of the Skeptic Society and a fellow with the committee.
He did tell him, and he saw something. And coincidentally, the missile shut down.
Coincidentally, isn't that a weird coincidence?
Yeah, but many times I've flipped a light switch and
what
you
if
hear
the
a
same,
siren. I mean,
what if the same thing happened a week earlier? Only this time, 10 missiles go down. A lot of security guards see the UFOs right above the
or 5 other missile bases.
Okay, so why haven't we?
Is that a coincidence too? I mean, you combine the
50s,
two.
60s, 70s, and 80s.
One at a
There was over 100 people. Bill.
Well, in science, it's not
I wish Edgar Mitchell were here, but in any case, coaches
in the
among
interest
our
of time,
nuclear missile
in the
forces.
interest of time, Dr. Jacobs, he takes pictures, he comes back, they call him in, they show him the pictures of
I
this
saw it. I'm an
strange thing.
eyewitness.
He saw it.
I'm not talking about.
And they confiscate it.
Yeah.
Why?
I wouldn't be surprised.
Hello?
Well, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
You mind if I speak, Mr. Comedian?
Go ahead.
I was there. I saw the film with my own eyes. I'm not lying. Why would I? I'm a university professor with a PhD and a lot of years of good, respectful research. So the guys from Ulster may not have seen the UFO, but they saw the results of it. I saw the damn thing on film with my own eyes, so don't call me a liar, and you weren't there. I was.
With all due respect, I'm not calling you a liar. It's just quite a step to say there was a film with remarkable images on it that the CIA confiscated.
Which I saw and which they did.
Yeah, which is quite a step from there to say it was definitely a spacecraft from another civilization. That's the leap that the skeptical community is reluctant to take.
Hey, pal, listen to me. I didn't say it was a spaceship from another civilization. I said it was something in the air that we couldn't identify. Therefore, it was an unidentified flying object. It was shaped like 2 saucers put together with a golf ball on top, and it fired a beam that we assumed was a plasma beam at a dummy warhead and knocked it out of space. Tell me what happened. Tell me who did that. Tell me in 1964 who had that technology, pal. Not us, and not the Russians, and nobody I know of. Nothing. There was nothing in our inventory that could possibly do that.
Let's do this other little thought experiment, everybody. Okay, let's say this has been going on since 1967, routinely, right? There's an old joke in broadcasting.
Are you going to do this with baking soda and vinegar, Bill?
Hold on. We're running out of time. If you're questioning what he's seen...
No, well, I'm questioning the conclusion that the technology did not exist in 1964 to produce images on film that the CIA would want to confiscate.
If I may.
Well, in 1964, you were trying to figure out what... In 1964, you were trying to figure out what girls were. I was in the service in a scientific capacity.
So, sir, you can attack me.
Get off your skeptic high horse, pal.
Well, it just doesn't...
You're attacking us. You're the one who's making ad hominem attacks and saying that's quite a step. You bet it's quite a step.
My name is John Callahan. I'm a retired FAA employee. I was the division manager for the Accidents Evaluation and Investigation Division in D.C. About 2 years before I retired, I received a call from Alaska region where the region wanted to know what to tell the media. When I questioned, tell the media what, he says about the UFO, and it went downhill from there. What UFO? It turned out I told him what any government employee would do at that time was to tell him it's under investigation. And then I had him send all that data to the FAA's tech center in Atlantic City. The next day, my immediate boss, service director, Javi Safir, and I went to Atlantic City. I had just purchased a new video camera, and I videoed the event. In Atlantic City, we had them play back on a scope, you would call it a scope, a plan view display, PVD, exactly what the pilot seen or what the controller seen, and we tied that in with the voice tape so we could hear exactly what the controller said and what he heard, and we taped it. We came back the next day. briefed the administrator, Admiral Ingen, on what happened. He wanted a 5-minute briefing. After we started the briefing, he wanted to know if he could see the video. We put the video on. He watched the video, the whole video. The next day, he set up a meeting for me to give a dog and pony show to President Reagan's scientific staff and whoever they brought over, and to hand off all that data to them. That morning in the FAA round room, it was either 9 or 10 o'clock, 3 men from Reagan's scientific staff, 3 CIA people, 3 FBI people, and I don't remember who the other guys were, along with all the FAA experts that I brought with me that could decide or talk about the hardware and the software, how it worked. We put on a dog and pony show. We let them watch the video. We had all the data there. We had all the printouts that the computer put out. They got all excited over it. When it was all done, the CIA, one of the CIA men told the people they were now sworn to secrecy, that this meeting never happened and this event never happened. When I asked him why, I thought it was probably just a stealth bomber at the time. He says, well, this is the first time that we have recorded radar data on a UFO, and these guys are going to get all excited, drooling over all this data. I said, well, you're going to tell the public about it? And he says, no, we don't tell the public about this. It would panic the public. He says, we're going to go back and study this. I said, okay. It was what he was going to do. Now, I've told this story many times, and I get sometimes funny looks from people. I have with me the voice tapes of the controllers that were involved, the FAA original tapes. See, after we handed this stuff off to the president's staff, the FAA didn't know what to do with it. We don't separate UFOs from real traffic, so it's not our problem. Okay? I have a copy of the original of the video that we took, which is rather interesting. And once the thing was all over, the reports started coming into my office, but because it wasn't an FAA air traffic problem, the FAA's report ended up on a table in my office. And it stayed there until I retired, when one of the staffers packed up all my gear and helped it move to my house. Also, in a box I found just a few days ago, in my 1992 tax return, I have the target printouts from the computer data, which, so if you wanted to or look at every target that was up there at the time, you can now reproduce this from this piece of paper here. And it's called the UFO incident, Japan 1648, I believe the number was. It happened on November the 18th, 1986. I'm prepared to go to Congress, to swear before Congress that everything I've told you people and everything that is here is the truth. Thank you.
We are now joined by a distinguished American in West Palm Beach, Dr. Edgar Mitchell, the Apollo 14 astronaut, 6th man to walk on the moon. Many of the Roswell witnesses told Dr. Mitchell their accounts, which he says were later verified by a contact at the Pentagon. What do you believe, Dr. Mitchell?
Well, I can say, Larry, I have no first-hand experience, but all of my experience comes from what I call the old-timers that at some point in their, before they passed on, and these were folks all gone now, and because I was who I was, because I lived in the area, I grew up in the area, and because I was an astronaut, some of them wanted to get it off their chest before they passed on, and I happened to be selected to hear their story. And all of them, as I heard some of the earlier testimony, all of them were under very severe oaths and fear and penalty for talking, but they did want to talk. And at some point,
what do you think, well, Dr. Mitchell, what do you think of Bill Nye's assessment when it comes to what happened, that this was a spy balloon?
I'm sorry, Bill Nye, he was saying everybody's colored by their beliefs and not looking at the evidence. I'm sorry, he's not either. And I think he's totally wrong.
So let me ask you.
Hold on, don't interrupt.
Okay.
Go ahead, Dr. Mitchell, I'm sorry.
Well, I eventually went to the Pentagon and asked for a meeting with the Intelligence Committee of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which I got with another naval officer who had had many similar experiences. And we told our story. And this gentleman, a vice admiral, said to us, well, I don't know about that, but I'm going to find out. And called a few weeks later and said he had found the source of the black budget funding for this project, and that he was going to subsequently investigate, because if it was real, he should know about it. As a matter of fact, he should be in charge. That was his words. And so we did get calls from him sometime later, and a report much later than that he had found the people responsible for the cover-up and for the people who were in the know. And we're told, I'm sorry, Admiral, you do not have need to know here, and so goodbye.
So when you refer to abduction, do you believe that people actually are being taken, physically taken by extraterrestrials?
I don't think they're being taken by extraterrestrials. We don't have proof that they're extraterrestrials. We know that whatever it is not human. Now, there is a hypothesis that they've been abducted by a covert, clandestine, rogue, non-state operation that looks at people of specific backgrounds with specific predispositions. Maybe it's a genetic thing too, and they get abducted because they're being tested or examined, or there's a purpose involved with that. That's a hypothesis I've heard among my colleagues. And the standard hypothesis that comes from John Mack and David Jacobs and Bud Hopkins' work has all been the extraterrestrial hypothesis, that UFOs are from another planet, they're coming down, they're going to pick a few humans off the ground to evaluate them, just like a cattle rancher who's breeding a specific breed of Black Angus or a specific breed of Charolais cattle wants to walk randomly into the pen or into the pasture, nab a particular cow, take it back, and like the former ranch manager, the original owner of the ranch at the time that in our era, the one who reported all of his family's problems with that phenomenon and ended up working for Bob Bigelow when they left the ranch. What he was a college-educated, very sophisticated animal husbandry expert, and wasn't just his skill at running a ranch raising cattle. It was his skill in that he was able to do crossbreeding and hybridization breeding using the techniques he learned in college, and that was he could transplant embryos. He knew all the process and procedures for developing bovine embryos and transplanting them in order to get the best breed of cattle with the best meat quality for a market. So he was that sophisticated. So he's going to wander into the ranch and just grab this female there, that female there, and take them into the lab or whatever he had at the ranch that served as a spot for examining his cattle, his two cows, his breeding cows. So that's similar in a way. It's almost a similar function. The only thing I caution your listeners is don't assume that you can apply human ways of thinking about these things, because although there's a metaphorical analogy to it, the fact is that anything that's non-human necessarily will not think like a human because of the way they evolved, the way their senses developed, and the way their senses provide information into whatever complex neurological cognitive system organ in their bodies, which we would call a brain. So they're not going to have the same ways or methods and frame of mind and processes to think and rationalize the way humans do because of the environment they came from. So we can't assume that. Now, if you're thinking they're a rogue covert operation of some sort, whether military or non-state actors, sure, they're going to behave like humans do. They're going to operate like humans do. But if you're going to take the hypothesis that this isn't human, then don't overlay human thinking and human framework, or human frame of mind, I should say, and human theories and human explanations and speculations on what they're doing, because what they're doing you do not know. They haven't communicated that to us. We have no idea what that's about. We can speculate endlessly. So
I want to thank y'all for being here today. I'm Tim Burchett from Tennessee's 2nd Congressional District, and we're going to have some the rest of the Congress folks are going to fill in here in a second. Next Wednesday, July 26th at 10 a.m., the House Oversight Committee will hold a hearing on unidentified anomalous phenomena, UAPs, I prefer to call them UFOs. It will be held by the Oversight Committee on National Security, the Border, and Foreign Affairs. The witnesses will be as follows. David Grush. He's a decorated former combat officer who served in Afghanistan, and he recently told the world news about his experiences serving on a UAP task force led by the U.S. Navy from 2019 to 2022. Commander David Fravor. He's a former Navy commander who shot the famous Tic Tac video that you've seen. It's on YouTube. It's 60 Minutes did a special on it. He did that in 2004 during a routine training flight over the Pacific Ocean. Ryan Graves. He's a former Navy pilot. He reported multiple UAP encounters during training flights. And the interesting thing about Ryan was that he warned the Pentagon that these encounters are putting our pilots at risk. He attended the hearing held by the House Intelligence Committee last year, but was not allowed to speak. If you all remember, he wasn't even allowed admittance. He had to have someone gave him press credentials to get in, which I thought really stunk. Last year, the House Intelligence Committee held a hearing on UAPs. They brought in some Pentagon bureaucrats who only had 2 answers to the questions they were asked. I don't know, or that's classified. This hearing is going to be different. We're going to have witnesses who can speak frankly to the public about their experiences. We've had a heck of a lot of pushback about this hearing. We've had members of Congress who fought us. We've had members of the intelligence community and also the Pentagon. Even NASA backed out on us. There are a lot of people who don't want this to come to light. I've even tried to introduce an amendment to the Federal Aviation Administration Reauthorization Bill, and all that would do would require the Federal Aviation Administration to report UAP sightings by commercial pilots to Congress. I was told the intelligence community shut it down. This is ridiculous, folks. They do exist or they don't exist. They keep telling us they don't exist, but they block every opportunity for us to get a hold of the information to prove that they do exist. And we're going to get to the bottom of it, dadgummit, whatever the truth may be. We're done with the cover-up.